Let's be real, starting a new job is one of the most high-pressure situations you can face in your career. Those first few months, they can literally set the tone for your entire time there. So, how do you nail it? How do you make sure you succeed? Well, today we're going to dive right into that using Michael D. Watkins's absolute classic, The First 90 Days, as our guide.
Watkins really just drops the mic with this quote, doesn't he? It's not just a clever line, it's a gut check. It reminds you of the incredibly intense pressure and the super compressed timeline you're working with. Every move you make is being watched, and people are forming opinions about you fast. You just don't have a moment to waste. Watkins calls this initial period a crucible, and he chose that word for a reason. A crucible is all about intense heat and transformation, but it's also a place of extreme vulnerability. You don't have your work friends yet, you don't have deep knowledge of how things really work, and that makes it a time where even tiny mistakes can have these huge cascading consequences.
And this right here, this is a perfect illustration of what can go wrong. It's what he calls the vicious cycle. It all starts with not learning enough, which naturally leads to making some bad calls. And those bad decisions, they chip away at your credibility. Once that starts to go, you meet resistance, and it becomes way harder to get people on your side. It's a classic downward spiral that can completely derail even the sharpest people. Think that sounds a little dramatic? Okay, check out this number. A survey asked CEOs how long it takes for a typical mid-level leader to actually become a net contributor to the company. The average answer was 6.2 months. That is more than double the 90 days you have to make that critical first impression. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to beat that number.
So, okay, if that's the big scary problem, what's the solution? Well, according to Watkins, it's all about zeroing in on one single, absolutely critical goal, hitting your break-even point. And here's what that means. When you first start, you are a net consumer of value. Think about it. You're learning, you're taking up other people's time, you're drawing a salary, you're taking more than you're giving. The break-even point is that magic moment when the scales finally tip and the value you produce equals the value you've consumed. Your number one goal is to get to that point as fast as you possibly can.
What I love about this visual is that you can actually see the journey. That whole area below the line, that's you consuming value. And everything you do, learning quickly, building alliances, getting some small wins under your belt, is what pushes that curve up, 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 until you finally cross that line into creating value. The faster you can make that climb, the better.
And here we go. This is the flip side of that nasty downward spiral we saw earlier. This is the virtuous cycle, and this is what you're aiming for. It starts with really focused learning and building good relationships. That leads to smarter decisions, which in turn boosts your credibility. And that credibility, that's what lets you score some early wins, which gets even more people in your corner, creating this powerful upward momentum. But of course, to get on that virtuous path, you've got to be smart enough to sidestep some really common and honestly very tempting traps that can sabotage your whole transition before you even get your feet wet.
I mean, we've all seen this happen, right? There's the classic sticking with what you know, where you just try to run the exact same plays that worked in your last job, assuming they'll work here. Or, and this is a big one, falling for the action imperative, that nagging feeling that you have to do something, anything, to make your mark right away. That almost always leads to rash, half-baked decisions. So to avoid these traps, you can't just wing it. You need a real strategy. And the very first pillar of that strategy is correctly diagnosing your specific situation. See, not all transitions are created equal, and your game plan has to be tailored to the challenge you're actually facing. The big question is, are you being promoted from within, or are you starting at a totally new company? Because the answer changes everything. So let's look at the two most common types. If you get promoted, your challenge is really about adapting your skills. You already get the culture, but now you have to learn to delegate in new ways, navigate much trickier politics. But if you're onboarding at a new company, the challenge is all about adapting to the context. You probably have the skills they hired you for, but you're a blank slate when it comes to the culture, the alliances, and the political landscape. And for anyone who's onboarding, this culture pyramid is so important. It's pretty easy to spot the surface level stuff, right? The dress code, the office layout. But to really adapt, you have to dig down to understand the hidden layers, the unwritten rules, the social norms, and the really deep-seated beliefs and values that actually drive how things get done around here. So before you can start tackling the organization's problems, you've got to take a hard look in the mirror. Every single one of us has vulnerabilities and natural tendencies that can become major blind spots in a new job. So how do you figure out what yours are?
This little tool from the book is just brilliant for self-assessment. It basically asks you to rate how much you enjoy solving different kinds of problems: technical ones, political ones, and cultural ones. Are you the kind of person who just loves to get lost in a spreadsheet, but you'd rather do anything than navigate office politics? Or maybe you're great at building consensus, but your eyes glaze over in a technical meeting. Just knowing your own tendencies is the first step to making sure you compensate for them. Okay, so now that you have all this self-knowledge and a better sense of the situation, it's time to get tactical. You can't just cross your fingers and hope for the best. You need a concrete plan. Now, a 90-day plan isn't some giant document you write once and then forget about. It's way more useful to think of it as a series of evolving milestones. Just think about it. What do you absolutely need to accomplish by the end of day 1? What about week 1? And by the end of your first month? Breaking it down like this makes the whole massive task of a transition feel way more manageable. And it helps you build that critical momentum we were talking about. And that brings us to the final and maybe most important question. Momentum is built on credibility, and credibility is built on early wins. Now, these don't have to be some massive, earth-shattering achievements. They just need to be tangible, visible successes that show people you're competent and build a little bit of trust. So, as you think about starting your new role, what is the very first early win you can go after?